Hello everyone, and welcome to the third class of Medita Mundi, which we have titled How to Meditate in Practice, and in the video you've seen, Awakening the Consciousness, from the perspective of universal Gnosticism. So the recapitulating on what we have been doing in the last 2 days, for those of you that haven't been connected, we can move on to the next slide. We've talked all about the context of meditation, its benefits. We can follow the slide, Jorge, keep moving. And we've talked about health. We've talked about the benefits for the mind, and obviously for the awakening of our consciousness. Now, here we're going to move straight into see a vision of mankind, womankind, human beings as unachieved beings. This means that all of us are experiencing ourselves in the physical realm, but we are only the possibility of something truly real and magnificent. In other words, all of these things are latent in us. As the slide, we can see it here, it says, latent powers to develop. We talked yesterday about the chakras and the objectives of meditation and the underlying principles of it. And we talked about vocalization. We practiced that, or we demonstrated that, and the power of mantra. And we explained that each one of these centers, vortexes, or energy centers known as chakras, can be stimulated, and they affect our entire nervous system, endocrine system, and they affect the inner dimensions of our existence. In Gnosticism, we understand there are 7 dimensions. From the first dimension, where there is only unmanifest creation, light. And then from then on, it unfolds. And every time there is an unfolding to another dimension, we have more complication, more manifestation, until eventually we reach the physical plane, in which we find ourselves in a physical body, just like all the plants and animals all over the world. And here we can see that the latent faculties of intuition, clairvoyance, telepathy, the power of ubiquity, of being in many places at the same time consciously, to be able to listen in clairaudience to sounds or beings from higher planes of consciousness or dimensions. Polyvoyance is very advanced to see everything at the same time in all dimensions. Levitation, premonitions, and so on. We've all heard of these things, and if we accept that some people have these gifts or faculties, or one of them or other of them, or there have been great teachers, masters, gurus, prophets who have been able to express objectively in a given culture at a given time cosmic wisdom, knowledge, and teaching to help mankind in that culture on its way to the light, to evolution of spirit, consciousness, and soul. So we can see on the right, there is some things we must learn to do, for example, which through meditation we can begin to achieve. Mastery of our own elements, of our own nature. After all, we are nature, we are children of nature, we are made of the elements of creation, and therefore the elements of earth, fire, air, water, ether, and the entire biochemistry that has come out of those ingredients in the process of creation are all within us. And therefore, we need to have understanding, and we need to be able to master our own nature. Otherwise, we have no ability to control either our mind or to move in higher planes of consciousness within ourselves, i.e. awaken our own consciousness and become part of a greater nature or creation or cosmos, and tune and fuse with that. Obtaining revelations through dreams, this is something we will all have heard about, dream interpretation. Well, the more harmonious, the more developed the body physically and internally becomes, and the person themselves becomes aligned with their own consciousness, then obviously dreams become more lucid, and then we have the phenomenon of astral traveling on other dimension, on the astral plane, consciously, out-of-body experiences. And we've answered some questions about that. To invisibility, for example, or curing and healing the sick, which we know there are human beings who have these capacities and have had all through time. So what this is showing us is that actually a human being is immensely unachieved, underdeveloped. And it's not a question of, we're used to in school being told, well, you must work harder, you're a low achiever, and you must work harder, study harder in order to get better results and a better career, a better job, and so on and so forth. In spiritually speaking, we're in a very embryonic state in terms of the possibilities available to an essence, or that part of us which comes from the origin of things, from the highest dimension, and has unfolded to have experiences in the physical plane of free will and the ability to make mistakes, to learn from them, and to obtain consciousness of the whole process, i.e. of creation itself. So in the great school of life, which we've been talking about in the previous two classes, apologies to those of you who have just joined, because we can't go over the whole of the last two classes in order to fill you in on all the details of what we've been talking about in the preparation and build up to this theme. So let's move on to the next slide. Jorge, please. And here we have an idea. Reality is far beyond that which our physical senses perceive. i.e. we're much removed from an objective, open consciousness and direct knowledge and perception of what really is going on in ourselves and in the greater universe. And we have three different representations here of the same phenomenon, interestingly, from different cultures. On the left, we have the Hebraic traditional interpretation of the esoteric Kabbalah, or the Tree of Life, where it's showing us effectively all the different stages and phases and aspects of our own inner being, our inner divinity or inner higher consciousness, that can be incarnated and developed because they are all latent there. And the right hand, we see again the image from the East of the Oriental traditions, the Hindu traditions, of the chakras, the energy centers, reflecting again a reality which is not visible to the naked eye. And in the middle, of course, we have a beautiful image of energy fields, aura, etc., that have to do with the inner and subtler dimensions of our body. So these representations tell us about what exists out there and invites us to ask ourselves questions. Well, if that is true, either we have to decide this is not true, we don't believe this, and close our minds to it and carry on living in ignorance. Or if we accept that these phenomena do exist, and we have an unquiet mind and a need for discovery, then we can accept, yes, all over the world there have been teachers who have brought wisdom because they were awakened in higher planes, and therefore talked about what they actually knew directly, and they have brought to us all this information and tools through known history, at least, and long before documented official history. And here we are with the opportunity of going back on course in ourselves and inside of ourselves, instead of doing what most of the human race does, which is fascinate ourselves through our physical senses and project outside of ourselves some path or project into a non-existent future, rather than go inwards and develop inner faculties in order to discover our inner universe, which is the doorway to the awakening of perception and freedom. So let's move on to the next slide. That being said, and we talked about preparation for meditation. In this case, we have to prepare the environment, that it's clean, harmonious, appropriate in as much as is possible for us, so that we aren't going to find interferences and so on. Although we also mentioned that people who are experienced in meditation can actually meditate pretty much anywhere, because they have already created within themselves a permanent center of gravity around a spiritual presence, which they can evoke at will because it's always with them. So our personal hygiene is obviously very important. Diet is avoiding a full stomach. You can't meditate and do this kind of awakening process with a heavy or process of indigestion. Then we talked about music, effectively classical music. Also, we mentioned that music is not absolutely essential to meditation. It rather depends on the person, but it's certainly highly recommendable for beginning. Natural aromas, perfumes, natural essences are all very important to harmonize and enable us to integrate with the process. And we talked about breathing and did some breathing exercises and explained the need for relaxation. So this was, we went through all this in the previous talk, and we're recapping in order to move on now to move into the actual process of what happens when we have relaxed and prepared ourselves, and how are we going to go about actually entering into ourselves, into the science of meditation, at least at a preliminary level. So if we move on to the next slide, we can talk about 5 fundamental steps to meditation. So let's see the first one. If Jorge can move us to the first point, thank you. Asana is, these are the Oriental terms, which are nice to hear and see, is the actual posture. We talked about again in the last class, we don't have to go over that again, that you can meditate in different positions. We don't have to stay with the traditional notion of the lotus position. We can do it sitting down as long as we are comfortable with our feet flat on the ground and a completely relaxed body. The important is the relaxation of the body. We talked about different lying down postures in a star form or in the dead man posture, and also lying down on a couch. The important thing being that the back is as straight as possible. Then the second part is we're going to dwell on that in this lecture, which is pratyahara, or empty mind. How do we empty our mind? How can we enter into a state of non-thinking in order to experiment what happens when we are not listening to our mind? So we'll come back to that one. The third step is, Jorge, we need number 3 now. Thank you. Dharana, concentration. Well, the second step of emptying our mind is partly of learning to breathe, relax, vocalize, use mantra, listening to music, in order to center ourselves and make sure our body has just tuned in and is as relaxed as possible, and that our thoughts become less present and interfere less in our process. And that enables us to enter into dharana, or concentration, which is the capacity of focusing only on one thing, our attention on one aspect of our meditation. It could be studying some egoic element that we have in us or problem. It could be simply being still and concentrating on our frontal chakra and just trying to allow ourselves to go into a state and find out what's there. So there are different ways of focusing our meditation. Meditation is not just one thing. You can focus on different aspects. It is primarily a tool for investigation. And one of the most important aspects, which we'll come to again later, is understanding the nature of our own personality, the ego, the contradictions within inside of us, and to be able to, through comprehension, go beyond them. And then the next step, dhyana, is deep meditation. This is when we're not thinking and have gone into a much deeper state of connection and integration with our consciousness. And the last step, number 5, is known as samadhi, or ecstasy. And this is a state of total fusion with something that's beyond the self, beyond attachment, beyond thought, beyond mind, beyond the senses, and produces a sense of extraordinary well-being and joy, and is often known as the illuminating void. It's like we are told that it's a space, if you like. We can't describe it, and those who have experienced it can have access to any information. They have access to all the things that they need for their journey and what is going on and why, and so on. And only people who have become great masters of meditation achieve this. because it's the result of a very long process of training, self-discipline, and an understanding of the nature of existing and a cooperation with the schooling of life, working with one's own conscience and consciousness, awakening it, changing one's habits, thought patterns, throwing out anti-values, developing the positive values, which effectively mean the building of the true human, or the incarnation of the truly human within us. So this is, if you like, an overview of where we're trying to get to. So we saw earlier some slides of higher dimensions, different interpretations of what it is to grow into a higher spiritual form. And meditation takes us through these different phases until eventually the inner being, or self-realization, or what we call in Gnosticism as the inner being, becomes more human because it has access to a vehicle, i.e. us, our body, that has been prepared and energetically for that higher self to express itself. And that higher self is utterly unknown to most of us because we have not done the work to be able to have access to this process of elevating ourselves towards the divine, and through which that which is truly divine, and when we say divine, all we mean is transcendent, superior, from higher dimensions, pure light, can become more human. And the objective of the entire process is self-realization, that individuals on this planet in different cultures achieve fusion with the divine, and the divine becomes human. So the great masters, such as Jesus the Christ, the Buddha, Krishna, and so many others from different cultures, Quetzalcoatl from the Mexican culture, all achieved these states and were able to teach humanity, because the things that they were teaching were not from books, they were not from what other people had taught them. They were teaching direct knowledge to peoples at that time for a very specific reason. And therefore, nowadays, we can appreciate and even study different and compare different cultures and religions and begin to understand that in essence, they are all teaching the same principles. And meditation is something crucial to that process. So when we talk about, for example, concentration and emptying the mind, effectively, in the Christian tradition, many people would say, well, we don't meditate in the Christian tradition. But that's not entirely true, because although they might not go through all these processes consciously that we're talking about, deep prayer is a state of meditation, because it implies faith, it implies entering into a mystic state, it implies a true connection with the heart and a connection to the higher self inside, or the real being. So if we now move on to the next slide, we're going to talk now firstly about the problem of the mind, in order to clear up any doubts some people have, or the problem they have with the idea of, well, if you don't have mind and don't have conflicts going on inside you, then somehow what's the point? There are three kinds of mind, we are taught in Gnosticism. There is the sensual mind, which is that part of the mind which deals only with the five senses and is useful to move about and organize the body and ourselves within the physical world. But the sensual mind has no access or knowledge of higher truths or meanings. It's designed, and its function is to help us operate in the physical world. Then we have a second mind, or second aspect of mind, called the intermediate mind, which is associated mostly with the intellect and beliefs. It is in the intermediate mind, that part of us which knows things intellectually or theoretically. And every culture is based, or is able to construct itself through theories, ideas, beliefs of any kind. And all of those beliefs belong to the intermediate mind. And in the West, for example, our entire civilization is based on intellectual ideas, ideals or principles or theories or things, democracy or communism, atheism. It really doesn't matter what, including religious beliefs, also come into the intermediate mind. So then the third aspect of mind is the inner mind. And the inner mind has nothing to do with intellect. The inner mind is connected to the faculty of intuition. And therefore, the inner mind is or connects us directly to our inner being, or the higher self, as some people call it. And this gives us direct access to information or intuitive feeling for what it is we should be doing and how we should be going about doing it. That is why sometimes we know things without knowing why. That's the nature of intuition. You know something, but you can't even explain how you know it. So the inner mind is something that very, very few people ever develop, because it requires a complete understanding of the nature of the sensual mind, the senses, the body, the personality, the ego, all aspects of our emotions, our instincts, our sexuality, our passions, our drives, our projects. It requires a total understanding of the intermediate mind. It requires an unlearning of everything we've learned, and then it requires an opening to a new kind of learning, which is not based on reasoning, on comparing one thing to another, which is what the intermediate mind does. Which is why we have incredibly complicated lives and live in an incredibly complicated civilization. And that makes for an enormous amount of stress, conflict, contradiction, because that is not a natural process of existing in a body, and it is not a natural expression of the consciousness. So all the systems within our civilization tend to take us away from the inner mind, the development of the spiritual consciousness and processes of awakening, and drives us into a system of social media and communication that sucks into our consciousness, absorbing our mind through our senses and connecting us to what effectively is almost like a kind of metaverse. We all know that the virtual reality is now being created to entertain us and absorb us. But the way we go around in the physical world, in terms of the reality of nature and what the planet was made for, and how we ought to be living on it and can live on it if we are in true connection with the intelligence that created everything, then we would see that we are also living in a virtual reality, each one of us in our own private theater and drama. So we cannot reach states of awakening and higher consciousness if we don't accept these basic truths about what is going on with the human race, at least on our planet, which is the one we live in and know something about. So we need to calm the sensual and intermediate mind, which is what it means, in order that the inner mind can make itself available to us, or we can make ourselves available to those higher intelligences which do operate inside of us, but normally don't have access to us because we're closed off, absorbed in other affairs. So calming the mind is a process of relaxation, breathing, and that's where music comes in, vocalization comes in, mantra come in, and all of the practices we were doing previously. This enables us to concentrate and focus on what we really want to do, which is find out what's going on behind the scenes. So on the level of psychology, meditation is, these first processes are necessary in order to be able to focus on, why do I behave like I behave? Why do I have this or that conflict? What is going on inside of me in a state where it's not my mind that's trying to explain it to me? And it's not me listening to different aspects of the inhabitants of my mind contradicting each other, trying to convince me of different theories of what my problem is. And that is why, in this sense, investigation is a basic part at this level of meditation. So let's move on now, having dealt with that. And if you have questions, we can make a short break and interact a little bit. It's very difficult to interact dynamically in this kind of medium, but if you've been posting questions there, then Jorge can send them to me on the WhatsApp. And Jorge, puedes enviarme si hay preguntas. And as I mentioned yesterday, Jorge's technician helping us. And he's in Argentina. And while he's doing that, we'll continue moving forwards. So breathing and focusing attention on our heart means that we can learn to use this extraordinary organ called the heart. And in the measure in which we're able to leave the sphere of being trapped in our mind, we are able to enter the world of our own heart, which, as we've said, is not only a physical organ with its own intelligence, it is also internally the direct connection to intuition and to communication through heart feeling with the inner being. And to form a permanent center of gravity around conscious feeling, around this intuitive aspect of feeling, which is beyond desiring things. It's beyond the kind of feelings we talk about and relate to the five senses. It's an inner connection, an inner feeling for, an inner need to connect. And when we connect to this energy and develop our relationship with this energy, it grows and strengthens. And this, in a way, we can call that faith, because it's something that we can actually feel. And when we connect to that state, our consciousness is now partially free from ego and from personality and all the limitations of our existence. And therefore, we have created within ourselves this refuge, this space in which we can develop ourselves, discover ourselves, and connect to our inner being. The inner being has many, many aspects, which we will not be dealing with in these introductory talks. All these aspects of what is male, what is female within our inner being, all of them are part of the being. Every aspect or higher aspect of human experience is all part of the being, because the being and what our true identity is a replica of what the entire universe is. So if we talk about the great universal being, whatever name we want to put on that, then we are a miniature replica of that, but are not a realized form or expression of that great cosmic intelligence. But it's within us. So the objective of existing is to achieve realization of the being, of something that we don't even know. So for most people, this is not a fun thing to be talking about, because it's completely incomprehensible. Whereas the language that we are speaking now, it's a language of consciousness. It's a language which those who are connected to their consciousness and seek it understand intuitively, which is why when our consciousness is working and we are aware of ourselves, we can communicate in a way which is different from that which we relate to in the office, at work, often at home, and so on, with friends, colleagues, which is a very different kind of communication. It's a completely different kind of language. Whereas the language of consciousness, the language of intuition, the language of nature, the speech of plants, the speech of birds, the speech of animals, the speech of sounds, the speech of the seasons, the speech of the sun, all of these things speak through their vibrations. And when we learn to develop ourselves, our inner self, then we can connect far more easily with these realities, which are true realities around us, because they're not subjective, they're not opinions, they're not beliefs, they're not about, well, we think in the West this is this, or we think that is that. These things are truly real, which is why if we want to live in harmony with nature, with ourselves and others, undoubtedly we need to make an exodus out of our own personality through understanding it, not through running away from it, and entering into a higher, inner, more real, true, and connected state through which we can understand our existence, other people's existence, deal with situations, because we are empowered now not to get carried away with whatever opinion and emotion comes up in our psyche. And therefore we can operate differently, we can behave differently, we can think differently, and therefore we can do things completely differently from the way we've learned to do them. And this means that a human being who connects to their inner process is now governed by higher laws or principles than those which we are taught in our society. And those principles of higher consciousness and higher intelligence govern the lives of those who are on the process of self-realization. And therefore, the human aspect of us is, how do we clean up our act down here? All our overwhelming identification with opinions and feelings and emotions and ideas and so on, a complete fascination with our own limited selves at the expense of incredibly reduced consciousness. So the point is, we need to invert this process in order to become more real and more efficient in the life process. So eventually, comprehension and insight are the goals and the results. So we can't take any of you to a state of ecstasy. We can't take you to Samadhi. No one can take us to a higher state of consciousness. It's something that we have to want to do for ourselves, or need to do, and choose to do. So it's the opinions we have about this lecture or this process or any other are completely irrelevant to the actual process of doing it. If you do it, it works and you get the results. And if others are more advanced on the path, they teach us what they have learned on their process, and therefore we can practice that, not accept it blindly and then, oh, I now believe in meditation. Well, if we believe in meditation, it's not actually going to change our lives. We have to meditate in order to change our lives. We actually have to do it rather than think about it. So we are talking about a complete transition from intellectual-based, sensual-based interpretation of the material world, our own selves, our own who we think we are, and the discovery and the beginning of a completely different process where what will come out of that is a completely different identity governed by a completely different set of parameters with completely different results, which are a great deal more interesting than just carrying on repeating ourselves and forever fascinated with ourselves, but not really understanding anything about why we were born, why we're here, and what's going on, and etc. So let's move on, Jorge. Consciousness, that's what we've been talking about now. What follows that? Direct experience of the dimensions of nature, inspiration, contemplation, ecstasy. This is a different way of explaining those 5 steps or processes of meditation. And the result is a state of not only of knowledge and connection, but also of very profound well-being. Inspiration produces happiness, produces a completely different process inside of ourselves. The endocrine system works differently, the brain works differently, our feelings are different, our emotions are different. Everything elevates in a direct connection to how the cosmos is truly organized. And as we saw in the earlier images, if we are several dimensions inside ourselves, that we have a physical body and inner bodies in different dimensions, they're all connected and they all have different functions and they're all necessary to each other, but we're not aware of them. Well, if one is elevating one's consciousness, one becomes more aware of the presence and how to connect to these different aspects of the self, of ourselves. And this means we connect to nature, connect to life, connect to planet, connect to the cosmos in general, and are able to function correctly in a highly complicated and very, very confused, contradictory, and deceitful civilization that takes us away from love, truth, light, and knowledge. So thank you for that, Jorge. Let's move on then to come to the conclusion of this talk, or these 3 lectures. All we can offer is an interpretation of this ancient science and try to enthuse ourselves and into the idea that actually there is so much to learn and so much more to it than what we've been told, so much more to ourselves than what we've even thought of. And the invitation is, well, what are we waiting for? If the discovery of our own universe, the building of our own humanity, the building of something completely new inside of us that is truly real and truly connected and gives us a sensation of returning to where we have come from, then what are we waiting for? We need the tools, we need the map, we need the knowledge, we need the experience that others have had. And as we said earlier in previous talks, it's trial and error, if you like, but it's based on practical results. None of this means anything if we don't actually go about doing it. If we do it and practice, we get results. It's a results-based process. Self-realization exists, it's real. Consciousness exists, it's real. The awakening of consciousness exists, it's real. Inner dimensions exist, they're real. And we can experience ourselves in all of these aspects, if we so wish, but only by practicing, only by experimentation, only by direct experience can we achieve objective knowledge of what is truly going on, where we do not need any of the subjectivity of our civilization anymore to misinterpret everything that is happening around us, and enter into the extraordinary ecstatic processes of direct mystical experience of the nature of the universe. So if you have any questions, then now would be a time we could interact over that. And we hope that those of you who followed all three of these lectures have been able to see now why we've done them in this order and why the previous lectures are important to understanding these final ideas, if you like, that we're putting across. And we hope that you feel motivated to continue, those of you who are already familiar with meditation and spiritual practices, and invite you to connect to the courses that are offered through the Gnostic Culture. I think if we look at, Jorge can show us the QR codes. At the end, I think we go right to the end now. And we'll see, there's the booklet for those of you who have not meditated or not familiar with that. It explains everything we've been talking about here in much more detail. You can download that with the QR code. Then there are the courses you can sign up for. You can go to wherever there are instructors in your region. You can go and join a course. All of it is free of charge. None of us are doing this for financial gain. And then there is a third QR code, which if you wish, so you can make a donation, which could help finance more of these activities or many other kinds of, all even the courses, the literature for them, in order for other people to be able to receive this kind of knowledge and motivate themselves or work with themselves to achieve a better and higher standard of living inside of themselves. So thank you all very much indeed for joining us today. And you can send in questions. But the most important thing is that all of us are on a conscious awakening journey. And each one of us is living our own particular drama. And that drama is the result or the effect of the long journey our essence and we ourselves have been having in different comings and goings. And therefore we are here to harvest, or we harvest, whether we like it or not, the results of what we have ourselves created, which places upon our own selves the responsibility of all the decisions that we make and the consequences thereof. So I don't know if Jorge is going to send us any questions. There may not be any, but
No hay preguntas por ahora.
excellent. Okay. So from all of us on the team, there's an international team working on this from all over South America. Our technician for the English side is Jorge from Argentina. And then there's a whole team working in different languages, putting across these informations and courses to different speakers of other cultures and other languages. So thank you all for being with us, and we wish you all the very best in the journey that you're all on, and hopefully all of us will be able to achieve luminous results using the tools available to us. So Jorge, with that, I think we can leave the music and leave you all to think about, contemplate, and meditate on what we've been talking about over the last 3 lectures.